matter, and they recognized the man who was checking out at the time as Dick Anderson. Police immediately extradited Dick back to Minnesota, and after 3 days in jail, Dick Anderson would confess to everything. And suddenly, all the loose ends and confusing, conflicting pieces of evidence made a terrible kind of sense. The story that Dick had to tell was far more shocking than anything Detective Barkley or any of his colleagues had imagined.
Oh, fuck me.
Here's what really happened on March 6, 1963, the day Carol Thompson was murdered.
And then I have to take a shower, and then I have to do my meds, and then I have to go to the bridge. I was in a car wreck.
Dick moved silently through the kitchen and headed down to the basement, where he waited in the dark. Now, what Dick was doing was not his typical line of work. However, he was broke, and the $3,000 that Norman Mastrian had offered him to do what he was going to do was a lot of money, and so he agreed to do it. So Dick waited in the darkness of a stranger's basement, periodically glancing at the hand-drawn map he had been given of the home's layout. Dick had also fortified his courage with vodka and amphetamines, and so his heart was racing.
41, 42, 43.
The sun rose and Dick listened as just a few feet above his head in the kitchen, Carol got her family fed and out the door. About 20 minutes later, Carol answered the telephone rubber tubing Norman had given him. Dick's plan was to slip into the kitchen and strike Carol on the back of the head with this rubber. He thought a clean blow would totally knock her out. Dick could hear Carol's voice, muffled through the floorboards as she spoke to her husband. Dick carefully headed up the stairs until one of the wooden steps let a loud squeak. Carol's voice stopped cold. Dick froze and waited to hear Carol resume her phone call. He realized that Carol would hear him coming if he continued up the stairs, so he revised his plan. He would wait in the basement until he was sure Carol had left the kitchen.
17, 18, 19.
Eventually, Dick would hear Carol vacuuming on the second floor for several minutes, and then, right as he was about to go up, he heard the descended the last few basement steps, padded through the empty kitchen, and climbed the main stairs to the second floor. And as he did this, Carol heard him, and she walked to her bedroom door right as he arrived in front of her bedroom door. Carol opened it up. She was totally startled to see this man she had never seen before standing in her house. But before she could scream, Dick told Carol that he was just here to rob her. He promised that if she didn't get told, she would get through this just fine. And so, Carol did as she was told, and she laid down face first on the floor, at which point Dick struck her in the back of the head with that thick rubber hose, knocking her out. He saw water in the bathtub, just as Norman had told him to expect. But as Dick began dragging Carol into the bathroom, Carol woke up, and immediately she began fighting back. Dick, in a panic, pulled out the Luger to shoot her, but the pistol wouldn't fire, so he just began bashing the pistol into Carol's face. Blood flowed from Carol's forehead, but she just kept on fighting. Dick hit her again and again, hard enough to break off a piece of the gun's white and black plastic laminate grip. Carol eventually managed to separate herself from her attacker, and she scrambled down the stairs, tumbling into the entryway, and she tried to escape out the front door, but Dick caught up and 3 live rounds were popped out of the gun.
I think I've only got
At this point, Dick was totally panicking, and he left Carol on the floor, moaning in pain, and he ran into the kitchen. There, he rifled through a door and grabbed a 3-inch paring knife to finish Carol off. Dick descended on Carol in the hallway between the kitchen and front entrance and began stabbing her over and over. On the 50th blow, the knife got stuck in Carol's throat, and when Dick tried to pull it out again, the blade snapped off her hand. At this point, Carol finally stopped moving. Dick climbed off her, marveling at her will to live. But now it was over. Out the bedroom, pulling out drawers, knocking things over, to make it look like this was a robbery gone bad. As Dick bounded down the stairs, he didn't notice that Carol was no longer where he had left her, in the short hallway that led to the kitchen. Dick had no clue that as he was heading out the front door, Carol was stumbling down the block looking for help.
11, 12,
Dick left the Highland Park neighborhood and connected with Norman. Nothing in their plan had gone as expected. What was supposed to be a bloodless killing had turned into a gory and violent mess. Together, they disposed of the gun in the swampland north of St. Paul. And then, when Norman returned to his home, he picked up the phone to make the hardest call. This was the one person Carol had loved and trusted since she first met him 14 years ago at Macalester College. It was Carol's husband, Eugene Cotton Thompson. And he had been planning his wife's murder for almost 2 years.
I want to do it. I gotta go take my shower and do my meds.
For 3 years with a woman named Jackie Olson. He met Jackie when he represented her in a divorce. Cotton handled divorces as well as criminal cases. The attractive young mother didn't have the money to pay him, so Cotton got her a job as a stenographer so she could work it off. She'd go to, quote, business dinners with Cotton and out-of-town trips, while Carol stayed home with the kids. Cotton and new relationship at the Rock's fast, Cotton made another place for her. He promised Jackie that they wouldn't have to worry about Carol anymore, and they'd have plenty of money to live on for the rest of their lives. One of the clients that Cotton represented as a defense attorney was an old classmate from Macalester who had had several scrapes with the law, including being roped into an unrelated murder. This person was Norman Mastering, and Norman didn't have to plan anything. Cotton had that all figured out. Months before the murder, Cotton got rid of the family dog who barked whenever anything came into the house. Cotton had removed the upstairs phone 2 days before the murder, telling Carol he would swap it out for a phone that fit the house. New relationship at the Rock's fast, Cotton made another place for her. He promised Jackie that they wouldn't have to worry about Carol anymore, and they'd have plenty of money to live on for the rest of their lives. One of the clients that Cotton represented as a defense attorney was an old classmate from Macalester who had had several scrapes with the law, including being roped into an unrelated murder. This person was Norman Mastering, and Norman didn't have to plan anything. Cotton had that all figured out. Months before the murder, Cotton got rid of the family dog who barked whenever anything came into the house. Cotton had removed the upstairs phone 2 days before the murder, telling Carol he would swap it out for a phone that fit the house. He strike her with a rubber hose and knock her out, and then Norman was supposed to carry an unconscious Carol up the stairs to the bathroom where there would be water left in the tub. Cotton did not typically bathe before work, but on the day of the murder, he would. And he believed to stop her in the drain so Norman could fill Carol's lungs with the water. Cotton figured they could make it look like Carol slipped in the tub, hit her head, and then drowned in the bathwater. Knowing that the police would be looking at Cotton as their first suspect, he had had an airtight alibi. He'd be at work, making phone calls to his secretary. Cotton planned to figure they'd read for the murder.
47, 48, 49.
But Cotton's plan unraveled in a few key places. The actual killing did not help Cotton. Norman gave Dick Anderson the same marching orders Cotton had given him. But Dick wanted more than just a piece of rubber with him when he entered the Thompson house, and so he asked Norman for a backup weapon in the form of a gun. Norman then turned to his two robber friends who gave him the customized Luger pistol they'd recently stolen when they burglarized an apartment, and Norman gave it to Dick. Cotton could never have anticipated that pieces of a gun he never planned on using during his attack would then lead police to the hitman, who would then confess everything he knew. Police arrested Cotton on June 20th, 1963. As for Norman Mastering, the middleman for the hit, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, all of which he served, and as for Dick Anderson, the man who actually killed Carol, he would spend almost 2 decades behind bars.
Oh, fuck, it's 11:45.
The Mr. Ballin Podcast. If you enjoyed this, be sure to check out our YouTube channel, just called Mr. Ballin, where we have hundreds more stories, many of which are not available on this podcast. Again, the YouTube channel is just called Mr. Ballin.
I gotta get in the shower.
I really appreciate your support. Until
I gotta take my shower now. It's almost midnight. I do my shower and then my mess and then go to the bridge.
Today's podcast features 2 stories about very dark religious rituals. From both of these stories,
I don't want to take a shower.
And has been remastered for today's episode.
I don't want to take a shower.
Are in the description. The first story you'll hear
I know
is
it's
called
shower
Final
day.
Act, and it's
We
about
know
a
it's
group of
shower day. I
discoveries
just don't
on a
want to.
property
It's
in
so
India.
late.
The second story you'll hear is called
I don't have to.
and it's about the
I'm
ancient
going
Buddhist
now.
practice of